The workers tore the solar panels from Sarah's sunlit roof, the clatter echoing like a death knell for her dreams. Neighbors watched in stunned silence as hope vanished beneath the glare of harsh rules and cold authority. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of her driveway, arms crossed, her gaze locked on the steady hands of the workers climbing onto her roof. The solar panels, once gleaming proudly under the relentless Arizona sun, were now being unbolted, disconnected, taken apart piece by piece. Each panel removed felt like a theft, not just of property, but of her ideals, her commitment, her voice in a community that was supposed to be a neighborly refuge, not a battleground. It had been almost 2 years since she'd invested in those panels. The initial cost was a strain on her modest budget, but the promise of lower energy bills and a smaller environmental footprint made every penny worth it. Sarah was no stranger to sacrifice when it came to living sustainably. She had traded hours of weekend gardening for installing rain barrels, swapped disposable plastic for cloth bags, and meticulously sorted recycling bins. The solar panels had been the crown jewel of her efforts, a symbol that even in a sprawling suburban neighborhood one could push for meaningful change. Her neighbors, initially curious, had become quietly supportive. On weekends, she heard compliments from passers-by and saw a few of them nod as they passed her house. When the city offered rebates and tax incentives for solar installations, Sarah felt aligned with a growing movement, a quiet revolution of homeowners who wanted to redefine modern living. But Richard Kane and the HOA had other plans. Richard was the embodiment of tradition, a retired banker with a no-nonsense demeanor who clung to the neighborhood's image like it was a sacred trust. To him, the solar panels weren't just unattractive, they were a threat. The HOA's covenant, written decades ago to maintain uniformity, became his shield against anything that disrupted the status quo. He spoke about property values, about the clean lines of the neighborhood, about how too many changes would scare off potential buyers. His arguments were laced with a careful politeness, but Sarah heard the underlying resistance to progress and individuality. The official letter from the HOA came without warning. It was terse, bureaucratic, and final. Remove the panels within 30 days or face legal action. Sarah felt blindsided. No prior discussion, no attempt to mediate, just an authoritarian decree. Her appeals, her pleas about environmental responsibility, her references to state and city laws supporting renewable energy fell on deaf ears. As the removal day dawned, the weight of humiliation pressed down on her. She had to watch strangers take apart what she had built with so much hope. The men worked efficiently, but Sarah's mind raced. This wasn't just about aesthetics. It was about erasing a symbol of change that Richard and the HOA feared. She thought of the wasted energy, the lost savings, the stalled progress. How could they value conformity over the future of the planet? How could they dismiss one homeowner's vision so coldly? Her chest tightened as memories of the installation replayed, the excitement, the careful planning, the pride in making a personal contribution to combating climate change. Now, all of that was unraveling under the weight of HOA rules wielded like a weapon. Sarah's frustration was no longer just about the panels. It was about power, control, and the stubborn resistance to any idea that challenged long-held norms. She felt the sting of isolation, too. Where were the neighbors who had once admired her choice? Silence. Even the few who supported solar quietly withdrew, unwilling to risk conflict with the HOA. The community that had seemed a welcoming place now felt cold and divided. With every panel removed, Sarah's anger grew. Not a quiet frustration, but a fierce, burning determination. This wasn't over. The panels might be gone from her roof, but the fight for her values, for fairness, and for a sustainable future was just beginning. Sarah sat on the edge of her couch, the weight of the recent weeks pressing down on her chest like a stone. The house felt colder now, emptier. The hum of the air conditioner was louder, the bills piling up with relentless certainty. Without the solar panels feeding energy back into the grid, her electric expenses climbed sharply, each statement a painful reminder of what had been taken from her. But beyond the numbers, it was the symbolic loss that gnawed at her, a retreat from progress, from a future she had dared to imagine for herself and her community. Neighbors' eyes often lingered on her now, their glances a mix of sympathy and caution. Some whispered behind closed doors, quietly commiserating with her predicament, while others kept a careful distance, unwilling to challenge the HOA or align themselves publicly with her. The neighborhood's unspoken code was clear: conform or be isolated. It was a social suffocation Sarah had never anticipated, and it bruised her spirit almost as deeply as the forced removal of her panels. Yet, beneath the crushing weight of this setback, something stubborn flickered inside her, a spark she refused to let die. Sarah wasn't one to bow quietly to injustice, especially when that injustice wore the mask of bureaucratic rigidity and fear of change. She began digging, her nights filled with researching state statutes and regulations, hunting for any glimmer of hope in the maze of legalese. That glimmer came when she stumbled across recent rulings from the State Energy Commission. The law was unequivocal. Homeowners had the right to install and maintain solar energy systems on their properties, a provision designed explicitly to counteract HOA policies that were overly restrictive or punitive. It was a powerful validation of Sarah's cause, a legal foothold on which she could plant her feet and resist. With renewed determination, Sarah reached out to the commission, seeking clarification and support. The bureaucratic voices on the other end were surprisingly encouraging, offering guidance on navigating the regulatory framework. But knowing the law wasn't enough. She needed someone who could wield it effectively. Enter Mark Evans, a lawyer with a reputation for championing clean energy rights and taking on powerful HOAs. Mark was direct and passionate, a man who saw in Sarah's fight the larger battle for homeowners' freedoms and environmental progress. Mark's assurance fortified Sarah's resolve. He explained how the state law effectively invalidated any HOA rule that unreasonably restricted solar panel installations. This wasn't just a matter of personal preference anymore. It was a legal mandate, a protection for individuals like her who dared to challenge outdated norms. But the HOA, led by Richard Kane, wasn't willing to concede easily. Their response was swift and aggressive. Legal threats arrived on her doorstep, letters steeped in formal language warning of fines and lawsuits. The board ratcheted up the pressure, painting Sarah as a disruptive element, a troublemaker undermining the peace and aesthetic harmony of their carefully curated neighborhood. They held meetings behind closed doors, rallying wary neighbors to their cause, turning community sentiment into a weapon against her. The tension in the neighborhood thickened palpably. Sarah felt it in every sideways glance, in every whispered conversation she overheard while collecting her mail. Anxiety clawed at her, the constant threat of legal action and social ostracism gnawing at her nerves. But alongside the fear was something stronger, an unwavering commitment to fight. This wasn't just about solar panels anymore. It was about standing up to entrenched power structures, about reclaiming the right to innovate, to make choices for a sustainable future. Quietly, Sarah became a symbol, a beacon for others who admired her courage but were shackled by their own fears of HOA retaliation. Her phone calls multiplied, neighbors seeking advice in hushed tones, asking if they could join the fight, or at least offer support, without drawing the board's ire. Her home, once a target of isolation, started to feel like the epicenter of a subtle, simmering resistance. Sarah's journey was far from over. The pain of loss lingered, but so did the flicker of hope, bright, fragile, and fiercely alive. The morning sun poured down with an almost reverential glow as Sarah stood at the edge of her driveway, eyes fixed on the workers climbing onto her roof. Each carefully lifted panel seemed less like a piece of technology and more like a reclaimed piece of her identity. Something wrested back from the clutches of bureaucratic oppression and neighborhood politics. The crisp Arizona air was electric with anticipation, the neighborhood around her unusually silent, as if holding its breath for the moment of justice to fully unfold. Months of relentless legal wrangling had brought her here, to this fragile victory. The State Energy Commission's ruling was not just a triumph for Sarah. It was a decisive blow against the entrenched power of HOAs that had long stifled individuality under the guise of community standards. The Commission's decision explicitly dismantled the board's ability to wield outdated aesthetic guidelines as a weapon to suppress sustainable innovation. Richard Kane, once the unyielding gatekeeper of the neighborhood's appearance, had been publicly unmasked. His ironclad resistance faltered under scrutiny, revealing an obsession with control rather than any genuine concern for property values. As the panels clicked firmly into place, Sarah's smile grew, not from relief alone, but from the weight of what this victory symbolized. This was validation of her vision, a tangible proof that perseverance in the face of injustice could alter the status quo. The crowd of neighbors, once divided and wary, had shifted in tone. Some still exchanged doubtful glances, their minds shackled by habit and fear. But many others, quietly inspired, offered nods of respect, some even clapping softly in encouragement. For them, Sarah was no longer just the woman with those panels. She had become a beacon, a rallying point for change. In the weeks that followed, the ripple effects of her stand spread beyond her cul-de-sac. Calls and messages poured in from homeowners across the city and even the state, emboldened by her example. They were tired of the restrictive, suffocating rules imposed by faceless boards that too often prioritized conformity over innovation and progress. Her fight forced local governments to reevaluate and amend policies to better protect green energy initiatives, making it harder for HOAs to impose arbitrary bans on solar installations. Lawmakers and environmental groups seized the momentum Sarah's case generated, weaving it into broader legislative efforts aimed at combating climate change at the community level. Sarah's own life shifted as well. No longer isolated or sidelined, she was invited to speak at community meetings, environmental panels, and neighborhood forums. Her voice carried weight, a testament to the power of one person's determination to reshape the narrative. She found herself mentoring other homeowners caught in similar battles, sharing her experience, legal strategies, and above all, her belief that no individual should be silenced by outdated rules. Every morning as the sun hit those panels, Sarah felt a surge of pride that went beyond saving money or reducing emissions. It was the triumph of justice over bureaucracy, of progress over fear. Her home no longer just consumed energy, it generated hope. The solar panels reflected more than sunlight. They reflected the resilience of a community stirred to action and the undeniable truth that change, no matter how daunting, is possible when someone refuses to back down. In that moment, Sarah understood something profound. Sometimes it takes just one voice, one unyielding stand to ignite a movement. And when that happens, the light it casts can illuminate the path for countless others, transforming despair into inspiration and paving the way for a future that finally belongs to everyone willing to fight for it.